Hello, fellow viewers, and welcome back to our show.
Today, we will be discussing the 50s with a new group, the
Hi.
Hey.
Let's begin. George, what do you think is the most important thing that happened during the 50s?
Well, Maggie, how can I narrow it down to one? I have to share at least two of the marvelous things that happened during this decade. First, let's begin with the Korean War. In 1950, the Korean War began. I believe it was the first major event in the 1950s. This war was fought between South and North Korea. U.S. joined forces with South Korea, and the Soviet Union joined forces with North Korea. The war lasted a long 37 months and 2 days. June 25th, 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea, and a lot of events happened during those years. Although it seemed like the war would never end, on July 17th, 1953, both countries signed a peace treaty. They may have signed the treaty, but the war never really ended. I think that Korea will be divided as two countries for very long.
Very well said, George.
Let's not forget about the lawsuit between the Brown and the Board of Education. That was very crazy. On the 17th of May, 1950, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled segregation illegal. It was Brown versus Board of Education, and the way public schools ran completely flipped. This case took a long, anxious wait, and no one knew what would happen, including me. 17 schools in the U.S. had laws for segregation schools, and only 4 of them allowed them to go to the same school. When the judge came to the decision, not only would the school system change, the future of the U.S. would as well. Segregation was banned from public schools, and they said that separation deprived Black children of equal opportunities. It was a big change for everyone, and I'm glad it happened.
Paul, what is one of the most important things to you?
Personally, the creation of NASA was such a game changer for the U.S. I mean, just listen to this. It was the year 1958 and NASA had yet to exist. NACA, which stands for the National Advisory Committee of Aeronautics, was basically the older version of NASA. They studied and pursued aeronautical research. On October 1st, 1958, they got rid of NACA and created NASA instead. The reason it was invented was to try and compete with the Soviet Union in the space race. They were scared that the Soviet Union would beat them to space and build weapons to kill them from space. It will change everything for us when we get to space, because we will learn so much about our Earth, and none of it will be possible without NASA. I just find this topic fascinating.
You are all so intelligent. I've been wondering, who do you guys think were important influences on society?
Personally, I think Harry S. Truman was a very important political figure from the 50s. Harry S. Truman was a World War I veteran who served in France. He worked in artillery, and he took office after the death of Franklin Roosevelt at the beginning of the Cold War. He implemented the Marshall Plan, which gave $12 billion to Western Europe to rebuild their economy. He was also one of the founders of the United Nations to keep countries at peace. The point of the United Nations is so that there'll never be a repeat of World War II again. Harry died on December 26, 1972, after a well-lived life as a successful politician.
I found that Igor Stravinsky was an insanely talented composer. Igor Stravinsky was an American composer born in New York on April 16, 1882. And when he was a little boy, he was given piano lessons and music theory. He went to college and studied law and philosophy at St. Petersburg University and graduated in 1905. His breakthrough, The Firebird, made him an overnight sensation as one of the most gifted of his generation. Igor died on April 6, 1971, which was 10 days before his birthday. Igor lived a very special life, and he was one of the greatest composers of his time.
Really, in my opinion, Peter Black was a very interesting artistic figure. Peter Black is an English pop artist born in June 25th, 1932 in Dartford, United Kingdom. He was also for creating the sleeve design for a popular music group, the Beatles. He also made a cover for the Band Aid single, Do You Know It's Christmas? Blake became a Royal Academician in 1981. He was appointed Commander of the Order of the British Empire during the 1983 birthday honors and Knight Bachelor during the 2002 birthday honors for his services to art. He was still alive today at the age of 86, and he has continued doing art on the side in his free time.
Kool-Aid, a 5-cent package makes 2 quarts of Kool-Aid, Kool-Aid, 9 great flavors, the drink you love. Kool-Aid, Kool-Aid,
For the very best drink you ever made,
Kool-Aid, Kool-Aid,
be sure that the envelope says Kool-Aid.
Welcome back, everyone. Paul, how would you describe the fashion from the 50s?
I found the clothing very stylish. The 1950s were the time of Christian Dior. This was a time of a lot of new fashion, and for the most part, all women wore was dresses and skirts. In addition, women wore dirndl dresses, jumper dresses, collar dresses, blouses, slim dresses, capris for pants, and most teenage girls wore poodle skirts. For coats, they wore swing coats in the winter and twin set cardigan sweaters. Also for accessories, women wore pearls, animal brooches, gloves, belts, hats, kitten heels, saddle shoes, and silhouette heels. At the time, and still during the 21st century, men's fashion was a lot more basic than women's fashion, and their style hasn't changed very much, or at least not very drastically over the years. Men tended to wear things such as slim-fitting suits, letterman jackets, skinny ties, saddle shoes, and bowling shirts. In this time, other items like vests and hats were also popular. There were lots of different types of looks for men in 50s, and a lot were inspired by people like Frank Sinatra and Cary Grant. Fashion changed immensely in the 1950s following the end of the Second World War, when clothing fabrics were very hard to obtain because the stock was limited. Women's fashions changed in a time full of dresses and clothes that contained lots of excess fabrics. There were plenty of poofy dresses, skirts, and coats. The 1950s were the biggest economic booms in the U.S. history.
One of you could describe the economy, I assume.
For sure. I'm so interested in this kind of stuff. After the Second World War, most of the world was struggling to rebuild. The United States, however, was striving, and they were living the life other generations could have only dreamt about. During the 50s, the economy grew by an overall 37%, and only 4.5% of people were unemployed. People earned money by working long hours with minimum holidays, 8.7 million of which worked in manufacturing, 880,000 in mining and quarrying, and 6 million people in the public sector. A whopping 96% of men were unemployed. The average family made about $3,300 a year, which was $200 more than in 1949, only 1 year before. Most households consisted of a mom, a dad, and kids. It was what was expected of them at the time. Women either got jobs like nurses, teachers, and librarians, which didn't pay enough for them to survive alone, or stayed at home or uncooked and cleaned. In the 50s, they had the upper class, the middle class, and the lower class. Most people were in the middle class, not struggling at the same time, not excelling. The middle class was doing upper class would probably just fine. Something for the example like graduating high school is different for each class. The upper class would probably consider it one step along the way, whereas the lower class would see this as a huge achievement. The 3 different classes played a huge role in the 1950s.
Wow, that was very well researched.
Now, it's my turn to talk. Religion is my favorite thing to talk about. In the 1950s and years before that, most music was written for religious purposes. Back in the 1950s, people said music was used to convey the glory of God. Also, it wasn't uncommon to use music to express religion and religious stories. That way, it is easier for adults and kids to understand. Religious music is not just a form from the 50s either. It's been there for decades. Music was used to explore feelings about religion. It is not as common as it was in the 50s today, but it is still in some of the music of this generation. The difference between religious and non-religious music may sound very different to some people, and as if they are complete opposites from each other, but they are quite similar. Religious songs talk a lot about God and other stories from that
Specific?
religion, and a lot of music from today also does too. It's just brought up in a different way. It might not mention God, but not be written as a religious song. For example, when an artist mentions God or they thank God for doing something for themselves in the song, that doesn't make the song religious. It could just be them saying thanks. Music combined with belief systems and religion can be one of the most impactful things in a song if artists use it properly. Religion impacted music in such a way back in the 1950s and 60s that the artists would, for the most part, only sing about their religion, if they had one, and the songs they sang would be a big indicator on what they believed in. This all depends on the artist because some of them are more passionate about expressing religious thoughts and feelings for others. This idea really depends on the artist and their point of view.
Ringo, I'm so curious to know. Talk to us about music. Where you heard it, what instruments were commonly used, who sang, and everything you know.
We, the Beatles, were most popular in the 1950s to the targeted audience, which is teenage girls. Now in the 2000s, I personally think their new audience is adults ranging from age 18 to 50. For example, the Beatles played lots of instruments throughout their whole career. I played the drums, Paul on the bass, and George on the lead guitar. But a lot of people who have listened to their music at the beginning of the 1950s think that we introduced those instruments to the music industry. They became noticed in the rock and roll era, early 50s, but became more known in the late 50s with their other genres of music. They had a big impact of pop culture, as many say. They are the third of the most successful boy bands of all time compared to Backstreet Boys and Jackson 5.
Now it's time for the moment you've all been waiting for. The upcoming band in action with their unreleased song, Love of the Love, written by Paul McCartney.
Each time I look into your eyes, I see that there heaven lies. And as I look, I see the love of the
Hi guys.
Hello, friends.
Hey.
Segregation was banned from public schools.
Okay,
So I just pretend to be rocking the bass because I'm the bass
Oh
player.
yes, we can play the intro.
Pretend to play.
Someday they'll see that from the start, my place has been deep in your heart.
Nobody will hear us right now, so it doesn't matter. Keep going.
I can't see you.
At kitten heels, saddle shoes, and silhouette heels. Frick are kitten heels?